So why don't we get started with the modeling process of our level? And I'm going to break this down into certain different milestones within the modeling process. In this first video, we're going to tackle our tileable textures of our level. So what are tileable textures? Well, if I refer back to my blueprint outline of the level I'm making, I can scroll through it and I need to start picking out what the tileable parts of my level are going to be. Here we have a little checklist of all the things we're going to be hitting in this video. First step is we're going to differentiate between what is going to be tiled textures and what's not tiled textures. So if we look at this kind of noisy wall of this building here, I noticed that I've already kind of accounted for making my buildings tileable with 1x1 planes, as stated in the last video when I was kind of building out and blocking out my level. So things like these building faces, it covers a lot of area on our models and in our level. Same thing for this brick right here. Same thing for these cinder blocks. And same thing for kind of this, I don't know, paneled concrete wall we have going on here. So what's not tileable? Well, you might be tempted to think that these windows are tileable because we almost see the same thing repeated and repeated and repeated. You may want to be tempted to even block out this whole square with the window included as one texture. But we're actually going to model these windows out separately. So we'll just model one single window and then we'll actually duplicate the model itself and place it. So the windows are not going to be tileable textures. The windows are going to be their own separate model. So with that in mind, we can get a pretty good idea of what's going to be repeated a bunch as far as textures go in our scene. So windows and other models such as the doors and the barrels, not tileable textures. They're going to be their own asset versus these really large area walls of our buildings here are going to be tileable textures. So why don't we go ahead and start making a plan of attack in our asset list? We're going to do three things. The first thing we've already kind of covered is we're going to tell the difference between tiled and not tiled in our game world. We're going to determine what kind of real world material these pixels and sprites are trying to represent in our level. And we're going to start grouping the textures by a texture sheet. So what does that mean? Well, previously, maybe in the first exercise where you were given that destroyed facility, you saw something like a whole wall being devoted to just one material. Well, we're going to practice something a little bit different today, or in this project. We're going to try to pack as many of these tileable textures, such as a stucco to the brick to the cinder blocks. We're all going to have them on one texture sheet and one PNG. And from that texture sheet, we'll be able to derive a whole bunch of different building blocks for our walls. So we're going to try to combine as many types of textures onto one texture sheet as possible. And you'll see what I mean when we get further into the creation process on this video. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my asset list, and I'm going to make a few more columns. Insert one to the left, one to the left. The first one's going to be tileable with a question mark so we can determine which of my textures are going to be tiled. And then we're going to do real world material. And then we're going to be like texture sheet. So I'm going to go through and start picking out my tileable textures now. This back wall right here is kind of blacked out, but in our 3D game, just a big black wall is going to look really weird. So I'm going to have to determine what kind of material is going to comprise this big wall. And I've determined I want this wall to be kind of a paneled concrete. So I'm going to go to my background high wall. That's going to be tileable. Paneled concrete for my real world, and I'm going to go with just say texture sheet A. I'm going to call my texture sheets A, B, C, D, and that like that. So why don't we look at my next tileable texture, and it looks like the ground is going to be tileable. So I look back at my numbered little key here. That's 22. So I kind of called it a cobblestone That's going to be tileable. I don't know, hex brick or something. I'll have to determine exactly what I'm going to be finding whenever I'm looking on the internet for that starting point for that texture. And I'm going to put it on texture sheet A. Next is the Stucco Wall, which is 32 right here. That's tileable. That's going to be a stucco material, and we're going to keep it on texture sheet A. 25 is my brick for my brick walls. So again, that's going to be tileable brick. We're going to shove it on the same texture sheet. And then I have these green cinder bricks. So 27 is going to be cinder block. Yes, cinder block. I'm going to put it on A. And I have one last tileable texture, I think, which is going to be this paneled red concrete slabs. I'm guessing this is supposed to represent. So a lot of this stuff may be a little abstract since the graphics back in the day were very limited on what they could do. So just you're going to have to do the best you can. That's going to be another kind of, or maybe we'll say something like concrete slabs. So you may have to make executive decisions on what this actually is trying to represent. So I don't know. I don't see too many just red flat things. So I'm gonna have to determine that maybe this is like a red concrete that's been painted or something. I don't know. But we're gonna try to keep to the original art direction of our levels as close as possible. So even though I've never really seen green cinder blocks, we're gonna make them for our 3D world. All right, and that'll be something to keep in mind if you're doing more fantastic games like something like Mario or something, when you're having to model out huge mushrooms or weird just blocks in the world that you jump on. You'll just have to do the best you can with what kind of real world material or what kind of material you want to base your texture off of. So that's a mouthful. So why don't we go on to our next step, and we got to start finding our texture sources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out one or two textures for my game real quickly and show you the process for 4 and 5. Then I'm going to pause the video and finish out making the rest of my tileable textures. And then we'll move on to 6, where we start making our texture sheet in Photoshop. All right, so I'm going to tackle my black concrete wall in the background here. So I want something that's kind of like a paneled concrete. I'm going to maximize my web browser here, and I'm going to go to cgtextures.com right here. This is my favorite texture website. It's meant for video game models and other types of CG projects. And if you go to members, you may have to make your own account because you are limited to a 15 megabyte quota per day for downloading things of that nature. So here we have a website, and there's 3 ways you can search for different types of pictures on here. You can just write out what you're looking for, and it'll try to give you the closest search result as it can. You can go to the outliner here and expand. So yeah, if you're ever looking for close-ups of an elephant, I've just found them for you. Or if I can click my textures header right here, you can just start clicking on the picture thumbnails right here. So obviously I'm going to make a concrete wall, so I'll go to concrete. And plate fence, that makes sense. I want to have a big concrete wall here. And there's a lot of different options we can pick from here. There's a few things you want to keep in mind when you're picking out your textures, especially for tileable textures. The first being, you don't want to have a lot of detail, specific detail in your textures. See how it has this rust right here? Well, imagine if this little thumbnail was repeated into infinity. You'd have this same little rust splotch over here, over here, over here, over here, over here. So you want something nice and even. Say maybe something like this little wall right here. So I'm going to keep looking through, and there's usually multiple pages here. I'm going to try to find exactly what I'm looking for. And that's not quite what I'm looking for. Let's get rid of that. Wow. There's a lot to choose from here, and a lot of it seems to be about the same. So I found what I was looking for, and I downloaded it to my downloads folder. Notice how this is kind of smooth. There's even light values here. It doesn't get really dark towards the bottom. It's pretty much got the same kind of light hitting it. That's another important thing. We're going to be tiling our textures. because when you tile, remember, when you tile something, you want everything to be as even and unremarkable as possible. If it's got splotches, it's going to repeat those same splotches. If it's going to be dark to light, it's going to repeat that same dark to light pattern, and you're going to start seeing the repeated nature of the pattern really easy. But I decided on this guy right here because even light, not much in the way of garish splotches or grunge on the wall here. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to minimize my web browser. And here's my downloads folder here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my project folder. I have all my folders for my level here. And here we have a folder called Texture Source. I'm going to drag and drop my panel concrete source to my texture source folder. I'm going to move this away. And then we're going to get into Photoshop. And I'm going to teach you guys how to make seamless, tileable textures. So I'm going to bring in my downloads folder again. I'm going to plop it right up here, and then it'll bring up my fence pattern right here. And I'm going to double click on background to make it a layer so we can unlock it. Now we can start editing my fence here. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick out a nice part of my fence. And I noticed that this little gray area here, yeah, I could include that with the texture, but you'll notice that this little post goes on up and it's what holds the barbed wire. And that got me thinking, I'm going to go ahead and have like this little post here modeled out as its own model. And I'll just insert it into just this flat paneled wall. That way I can apply my barbed wire texture to something. So I'm just going to focus on this little area right here. So I'm going to crop with my cropping tool over here. And here I have the panel like so. But, maybe I was too hasty in doing this. I didn't really think about what I was trying to crop out. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can make this image wrap around so all the edges flow seamlessly from this top edge will flow seamlessly to this bottom edge. And there's a quick way to do that. If we go to Filter and go to Other and go to Offset, we can notice that we have seams now, this vertical seam right here, but it's not too bad. This light value is a little dark here, and this little value here is a little light, but we can fix that up pretty easily. And then we have something a little bit more garish right here, but we'll be able to fix that as well. But I just was kind of haphazardly cropping. I didn't pay attention to a few things. You'll notice that if you just kind of select here, whenever this tiles around, I'll just go ahead and do that again. I'm going to go ahead and do an offset. You'll notice that in this middle panel is a lot skinnier than this top panel right here. That's because I didn't really crop it according to how it was kind of laid out. So it's important. I'm going to really start cropping from the middle of that panel to maybe the middle of this panel. So all of my panels will be of similar dimension. So now when I go to Filter, Offset, all my panels are somewhat the same width. So after I've cropped that, we need to make sure of one thing. This is very important. I'm going to go to Image Size, and it's going to show me how many pixels this little square makes up. And what I want to do is I want to keep within powers of 2. When you're working with textures and game engines, there's a lot of weird math and a lot of ways that the game is rendered from a 3D image on your screen to the textures on your model. So here we are in Unity. So every one of these buildings is going to be made up of some polygons, and it's going to have a texture slapped on it. Well, all of these textures are going to be comprised of pixels, but yet whenever your game is rendered to the TV screen is going to be made up of its own pixels or its own resolution. So you have two kind of layers of pixels going on here. You have the pixels on your model here, and you have the pixels of the actual game being rendered to your flat screen on your monitor or your TV. So in the game world, we have something called texels. And the difference between a pixel and a texel is The pixels we usually refer to in our game scene as what is actually rendered in our game view here. Remember, if our game is 1080p, then we have like 1920 by 1080 pixels running across this field right here. But then we also have the pixels on our models. We call those texels because depending on how close you are to an object in your game world, our pixels may be really big. And when we start getting close to some objects in our games, we can see the resolution start to get kind of blurry, right? Because the further you get up, the bigger our pixels or texels on our objects are going to be. But as we zoom out, now all the texels or the pixels of our textures on our model get scrunched in and get smaller. So since we're in an interactive world, the textures of our models are either going to get blown out or they're going to have to kind of be shrunk down and blurred together. So keeping our models and our textures rather in the power of 2. So I'm going to bring up Notepad and I'll go through what powers of 2 are. You'll probably know this from the console, the Bit War days. The Nintendo started out as 8 bits. Then Sega and the Genesis and the Super Nintendo came out with 16. Then you had the 32X. And then you had the Nintendo 64. And then after that, companies were like, okay, this is stupid. Bits of data, whatever. But if you continue onwards, 128, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, I have these memorized by heart because they're so important in the texturing process. Because the way that a game engine handles the texels to pixels conversion, depending on how far you're zoomed in or how far you're zoomed out from a model, the powers of 2 helps keep seams and other weird artifacts from happening on your models, depending on your angle that you're viewing your model and how far away you are from your model. So that's an important idea. You may not totally understand it, but just know that's a quick explanation on why we try to keep all of our textures in powers of 2, like so. So with this little square of brick concrete wall, I'm close to 512, so I'm going to go and do 512, and I'm going to uncheck constrain proportions, and I'm going to make this a square 512. And you'll notice now I have a nice little square for my concrete wall. So now when I go to filter, other, offset, I'm going to move these pixels by half, so 256 by 256. That puts our seams right in the center of our screen here. And I'm going to hit OK. Now we need to do the arduous process of getting rid of these seams. And our little clone stamp brush in Photoshop is going to be our saving grace here. So we're going to select our clone brush stamp, and we need to set up our brush in a few ways here. First, we need to make sure we have a really soft brush. And what that means is, see how this has hard edges? And see how some brushes have kind of a faded edge? Well, these soft brushes are going to mean we have a nice fall off. So we're going to get rid of these hard edges right here when we're stamping something. Second, we want to adjust our opacity to be something a little bit, less than 100%. So now with our brush set up, we're going to actually start getting rid of these seams. So the clone brush works like this. If you hold down your Alt key, you see your cursor turn into kind of a crosshair. We're going to start at the very tip top of our model here, and we're going to zap the very top of our edge over here. And I'm going to increase my brush size by using the bracket keys on my keyboard next to the letter P. And then I'm going to hold down Shift. You see how it's already kind of getting off there? We need a better job of zapping right on this crease. So that way, when we start our seam painting, our little cracks line up perfectly. So if you hold down Shift, you can only go straight up and down or straight left and right. So that takes care of that vertical seam. And I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to kind of select over on the edge here. I'm going to make sure not to get my seams this time. And notice how we have that little crosshair at the top? It's showing you exactly what we're pulling from here. All right, and you may have to do it a few times with different light values. Maybe a little too much. I'm going to adjust my opacity down because I can still kind of see a seam here. And I'm just going to go back and forth a few times just to paint out that seam here. And a nice way to see your seams is to kind of go to your navigator little toolbox here and zoom out. If you zoom out and still can kind of see a seam here, then you might need to go back in and fix these color values a little bit more. I'm going to increase my opacity. And we'll go in, and there we go. I've kind of darkened up that little area right there. And we kind of have a brighter seam right here. So I'm going to go in and kind of just paint over that. So I'm just trying to get my color values as even as possible. There we go. And I'm going to call this texture done. So I'm going to go back to filter, offset, and I'm going to offset it even more so I can get my original texture back. And this will ensure, now that we repeat this texture over and over again, that it's going to be seamless. And I'll even give us an example here. So I'm going to make a new 2048 by 2048. So here's a brand new scene. I'm going to press Control A to highlight everything here. And I'm going to press Control Z to cut. Actually, Control C to copy. And I'm going to paste it right here. So now I'm going to show you guys how we can seamlessly snap together our texture. So now we have a nice tileable texture. Pretty neat, huh? And this is what's going to comprise my concrete wall in the background. So with this texture done, I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a PNG. That's my preferred file type to work with. And I'm going to call this Paneled Concrete 512 by 512. And we're going to leave it alone for now. You'll see in my texture source folder, I have my source and I have my 5x5 tiled concrete panel texture. So I'm going to go through this process one more time for a little bit more complex texture to make tileable. I've already saved it. So I'm going to go back to my level real quick and let's tackle this weird hexagonal cobblestone type ground texture real quickly. So I'm going to go back to CG Textures, and I'm going to go to Brick, and I found the best one to be in Rounded on page 2. And here we have somewhat similar kind of design as we have in my game here. So I think that'll work really nicely. Okay, so how are we going to do this? All right, I'm going to go to my downloads folder because I've just downloaded it. And the resolution size you pick, keep in mind you have a quota of how much you can download. I usually download the medium size. It'll show you the pixel resolutions right there. So I've downloaded the medium size right here. I'm going to minimize some of these windows. And I'm going to take from my downloads folder, I'm going to drag and drop it into my texture source folder. I don't want to lose this texture source. I want to have it with me always. Get rid of that downloads folder. I'm going to bring up Photoshop, and I'm going to drag and drop this brick pattern here. So a few problems arise when we're trying to make something tileable here. Let's just haphazardly go at it real quick. So I'm going to just kind of grab this section right here. In fact, I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to grab my cropping tool, hold down Shift. And that way, it only grabs a nice square like so. That looks pretty good. Let's do my filter, other, offset. Okay, we've noticed a few things going on here. All right, I'm going to okay that. This is not going to be a keeper by any means of the imagination. So right now, our horizontal seam, it looks like it's matching up okay. I mean, that looks pretty good. That looks okay. That looks pretty terrible. That looks really terrible. But our vertical seam, things just go totally off the rails. We have no clear way of fixing this with a clone brush tool. I mean, look what happens. If I do the same technique over here that we did with my concrete, all it does is just make ridiculous looking brick patterns, and we even have ghosting. So we got to find a way where our hexagonal bricks line up better than what's going on here. So I'm going to go in and go to my history, and I'm going to click on the original graph right here. So when we crop it, we need to consider where we're going to crop. So I'm going to bring up my navigator. So to do this, I'm going to go to view, and I'm going to turn rulers on like so. So you have these rulers up here, and I'm going to make sure I'm in pixels just for the sake of it. And I need to start figuring out where are some good boundaries where I can clip and crop this texture from. So to do that, I'm going to click in my white ruler area. And here we can see I have these little teal colored lines. And I'm going to pick my move tool up here, and I can move them around. So I need to pick a good location where I'm going to crop on the vertical slice. So I'm going to do that by picking right between these two bricks here, and it should lead into the tip of the one below it. So that's pretty nice. Looks like it's going down. And then I'm going to follow it down. And then you'll see that the tip over here no longer lines up with my green line right there. So that's going to be a problem. But we'll be able to stretch and skew our image to fix that. So I'm going to do the same thing for this side. I'm going to pick a nice vertical slice right here. And you'll see on this side it gets a little bit more skewed, but I'm going to go and pick one right here. See, I'll have a nice little line here. And again, it gets kind of shoved over. It doesn't really follow the pattern because this is kind of an irregular brick pattern. And now for the horizontal, I'm going to base it off of this tip again. So my boundary will kind of be where the tip of this brick starts for the vertical slice and for the horizontal slice. And I need to find a counterpart down here that fits that as well. And that little tip right there looks pretty good. And I don't want to go much further down because this little shrubbery is starting to get in the way. But this little square right here looks about as good as I'm going to be able to get. Now I need to stretch and skew my original image here so this tip starts lining up with what we want. And this little area right here, let's see, maybe this little area right here will correspond to that guy right there. We don't want to do there. It's either going to be this one or that one. So I'm going to go down my bricks, and I'm going to find, so we got this one to that one to that one to that one. It looks like that, da, 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 da. So it looks like maybe this tip right there is where I want to go. So I'm going to put this tip right there. I'm going to hit Control T. All right. Oh, actually, I need to double click on my background to make it a layer, unlock it. So I'm going to hit Control T. And then with my little angle here, you'll see how it's just kind of scaling it, horizontal and vertically. I need to skew it. So I'm going to hold down Shift and Control. And I'm going to skew it to where this little tip of that brick and this little tip roughly line up in the same vertical slice. So from this brick to that brick to that brick to that brick to that brick right there. All right, and now I need to do the same thing on the right side here. So we're kind of at, and I'm going to go ahead and press enter. So we're kind of at the tip of this brick here. So it goes boom, boom, boom. That's weird. Boom, 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 boom. Hey, it's almost kind of lined up for us already. That brick to that brick to that brick to that brick to that brick. All right, great. I'm liking that. And This horizontal line kind of stays in line with the tips of all these bricks here. It gets a little weird up here, some of these brick tips. So what if we went down to like right here? These brick tips are a little bit more lined up. So I'm going to kind of get a weird rectangular thing going on. So the horizontal place right here lines up with those brick tips. And you notice I just didn't go down one because we're trying to line up the top of these bricks, not the bottom tips of these bricks. So I need to go down to the next vertical tip of a brick. And for the most part, they line up. So we're just approximating as best as we can the correct cropping area here. And then we're actually going to go in and we're going to crop this bad boy like so. We'll hit enter. We'll go to my image size. You'll notice I have something weird going on here. I got a really skewed height and width. So we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to enlarge this ever so slightly. We're going to make it 1024 by 512. Still powers of 2, but not exactly square. But we still have a nice power of 2 texture going on right now. And then we're going to go to other, and we're going to do our offset. Horizontal, we're going to go 512 by 256. We'll hit enter. And now you can see how we have some nice seams already lining up. I mean, that's basically perfect right there. Notice the seam right here. And this little seam right here is basically perfect. So with a little bit of planning with our rulers and guidelines here, we were able to make a nice little edit here. Now we can have bricks that kind of flow together, and covering up these seams is going to be a lot more simple. So we're going to go through and just use our clone brush tool. And it's going to be a little bit more involved than just simply dragging a line down the center here. All right. So I'm going to take my opacity maybe down to 90, nothing too short. And I need to start coming in, and I need to give this little section a grout. So I'm going to target this little top grout right here. I'm just going to clone it on down. And now we have the same grout right here, barely noticeable. And then for our actual bricks, I'm just going to come in here, and you'll see you might have some ghosting. Ghosting is, for instance, if I start up here, or say I target down here and then I start up there, then we're going to get a ghosting of a grout here. So you kind of want to stay even. See how my arrows kind of stays even with what I'm trying to clone. And then it's just a simple matter of going through here and picking out like grouts. So right here, it's a little messed up. The grout's not really working with the brick. So I'm going to grab this grout down here, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to give it a fake grout. And I'm going to touch up the stone. And it's still looking weird. So I kind of like that corner right there. So I'm going to clone it. And I'm going to give it that brick's corner. In fact, I can probably go in and give it the whole 9 yards treatment right there. And you notice I kind of went in that grout right there. So like so. So really you're just taking good looking parts of other like areas, and you're going in and you're just copying them. So I like that angle right there. That's looking weird. I didn't like how that happened. Let's give it this angle right here. And then I can go in and just do like so. So it's just a matter of going in and taking care of all your seams like I've been doing. Notice I don't even have a grout at all right here. So I'm going to go and sneak this one right here and just give it one like so. So it's a pretty fun little process. It's almost like a puzzle. And I almost don't even see the seam anymore in certain areas, even without touching the whole picture here. So I do notice a seam right there. Oh, we got a ghost of that little grout. You may have to adjust your brush size with the brackets on the keyboard. That's the weirdest way I like to do it. Again, you want to avoid ghosting things in. Here we have a little bit of a weird spot going on right here. So we're really going to maybe have to increase the size. And I'm going to start with this little section right here. And then I'm just really going to go in and remodel that almost totally. And then I'm going to go in and define that a little bit more. So again, it's just taking parts you like on your other texture and cloning it in other places so they look pretty good. Here we have another part that's just way off. So why don't I take something like right here. Like so. That's a little off right there. So I'm going to pick a like area, like maybe that little intersection. And when I zoom out, that looks pretty good, huh? So why don't we do the check and see if it really is seamless. I'm going to make a new texture, 2048, 2048, or a new image. I'm going to hit Control A or select all. Hit Control C to copy. Now, I'm just going to start snapping these guys together. And boom, tileable hexagonal texture. Not too bad, huh? All right, I'm going to hit no. And just double check our image size, 1024 by 512. But you'll notice that within our game, where's that? Let me bring that back up. Trojan Project, reference level. That my brick is kind of green here. So rather than mess with perfection here, I'm going to go ahead and save this as a PNG. I'm going to call this, I don't know, hex brick 1024 by 512. And then when I want to go in and change the color, I can do it on another file. But for right now, well, why don't I go ahead and do that? I'm going to go ahead and open up what I just saved. And we're going to change the hue of my brick here. And there's a few ways we can do that, but I'm going to try to do it as non-destructively as possible. I can go to Adjustments and go to Hue and Saturation and change the hue like this. Maybe give it a more saturation, darken it. But it's not really giving me that kind of deep green that I'm looking for. So why don't I just, I can either make a new layer here, and I can select a green swatch up here, pure green, hit Alt and backspace. Well, that just made a solid color. What if I do an overlay? That's not looking too good. But then I can adjust the opacity. And then I can give it a adjustment layer where I can take down the brightness, maybe increase the contrast, like so. What are these little, we're seeing little seams in our texture here, aren't we? I guess we need to go in and sort of fix that. So I'll press just the opacity on that. We can get it really green. We just want a hint of green. We don't want it to look otherworldly garish. And let's compare that. I got rid of that Trojan Project reference level 1. And even though this ground is just really hot green, I kind of want to shy away from something so ridiculous looking. Or, you know, you could just take it to that green. but we're just going to give it kind of a green overlay tone. So one thing I've noticed is that when I added that color, I was getting those seams here. So we're going to do a quick little trick to fix that. We're going to add another layer underneath my brick, and let's hide all my adjustments I just made. And I'm going to go to my eyedropper, and I'm going to kind of pick just a kind of a gray, and I'm going to select my new layer and hit Alt Backspace. So now I have kind of a background gray, and it fixes all of that, because we're seeing the kind of a transparent pixel line here. But when I have a gray background behind it, it just fills it in pretty nicely. All right. And it's still a little too green for my taste. And then we can fix the brightness a little bit more. Maybe not green. Okay, I'm just being nitpicky at this point, aren't I? All right, I'm going to go with that. End of discussion, except for I'm going to make it a little bit darker. All right, so with this in mind, instead of saving it as a PNG, since I have all these adjustment layers going on here, in fact, I'm going to name them green overlay bricks gray seam fill. So I know exactly what these layers are doing. I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a PSD so I can keep what's going on here. In fact, I would save pretty much all of your edited textures as a PSD. I should have probably done it for my panel concrete. I'll go ahead and just delete that. So now I have my green tiled hex. So when I start putting these on my texture sheet, I'll show you guys how we can collapse all these layers and make it just a nice little one layer thing, and then we can put it on our texture sheet A we were talking about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it now, and I'm going to make the rest of my tileable textures. Then I'm going to show us how we can put all of our tileable textures on one texture sheet and assign all of our different textures on the same sheet to separate models, and we can start actually going into our game scene and start paneling up our buildings. So I'm going to pause and we'll hit that up. So I've got all of my tileable textures made, and I'm going to go through them real quick. Here's my red stucco. I've saved this at 256 by 256 because the detail on it is so fine and so small that I think I'll be able to get away with just having a smaller texture. But that also means I'll have to have smaller models, smaller model plane to stick it onto. Here are my green cinder blocks, as we can see right here. Here's my red concrete wall that I'm going to put for right here. You saw my the road, the green hex brick road. Here's my background high wall, and here's just my red brick for all my red brick buildings like so. So now we have to go through the task of combining them all on one texture sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a master texture file, and I want you guys to kind of do this with me. So I'm going to go to my project folder, and here I have texture maps. I already have a default texture PSD set up. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And by default, or in this particular image, that the resolution is at 2048 by 2048. All right. Let's make sure we're in RGB. And I think, why don't we go ahead and change it to 16 bits of color per channel, like so. And you'll see I have groups already made up in my layers right here. I do need to make a few modifications on the names since, actually, no, it's just, I've already done that. I have a group for masks that I'll be making. a group to hold all my normal maps with a base blue for my normal map color. I have an inclusion layer, as you can see right here. I have an albedo layer for the actual colors that I'm going to be making. And here's my metallic group, my smoothness, and any kind of glow or emission. This directly relates to our material channels over here. We have the albedo, the metallic, the smoothness, normal map, occlusion, and emission. Basically, emission, if you aren't familiar, is the ability to make certain parts of your model glow or emit light themselves. Occlusion is self-shadowing shadows. Our normal map is what's going to give us our fake depth, and our metallic and smoothness is going to affect how shiny and reflective our surfaces are going to be. So here's my master texture file, and all these groups are going to really come in handy, so maybe setting those up would be good. So the first thing I need to do inside of Photoshop, let's go back to my outline, is I need to make a 16 by 16 grid in Photoshop. So what does that mean? Well, if I go to View, I go to Show, and I go to Grid, here we can see that I've already set up my 16 by 16, but it'll probably be different for you guys. So to change that, go to Edit, Preferences, and Grid Guide and Slices. So the way I've done it is I've set a grid line every 128 pixels. So how did I come up to 128? Well, first I changed it to pixels, and I knew that I have 2048 pixels in my whole image here. So I know I want a grid line every 16. I wanted 16 blocks here, so I did 2048 divided by 16. So if I placed a grid line every 128 pixels with only one subdivision, that gives me a nice power of 2 grid line I can start working with here. And now we'll be able to start placing all of my textures according to my grid right here in Photoshop. And that'll be important because we're going to set up the same kind of grid inside of Maya in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and start placing my textures here. So to do that, I'm going to, all these textures are saved, but I'm going to flatten the layers on everything. So I'm going to flatten my image. So now I just have this nice background, and I'm going to hit Select All, and then I'm going to Cut. Make sure you do not save during this process. So if I go to my master texture and press Control V, it'll place it somewhere within your outline here. We want to start placing these colors within our albedo. So I'm going to hide every other group here, and we're going to be working primarily in albedo. I'm going to name this to Cinder Block, and I'm going to place it, and look how nicely it lines up with all of these grids here. So if I place it right there, I get a nice brick pattern. You know what? I could probably have stood to make these bigger, but we'll just go with it. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to my cinder block and exit out. Do not save. Same thing here. I'm going to go to Layer, Flatten Image, Control A, Control C to copy. I'm going to call this Red Concrete. And notice how I'm not giving any space. I'm going to butt them right next up to each other, like so. All right, great. So I'm just going to do this for everything in my scene now. And I'm going to X that out and not save it. Layer, flatten image, Control A, Control X to cut. Paste it in there. I'll be able to call this hex brick. I want to X out of that. So now I have my red brick. I didn't really do much to it, so I'm just going to straight up go like that. Panel concrete, didn't do much to it. And so now we're just going to my stucco. I need to flatten this though. And now I have all of my repeated textures nicely laid out on my texture sheet here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're doing a lot of optimization when we set up our textures like this. I'm just going to delete X out of everything else. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this texture sheet A, and it's my master texture sheet. Why is that not a valid name? All right, that'll work. Texture sheet A. So now that I got all my textures butted up to one another, I can I'll get rid of my grid right now. And I can see that I have no wasted space between all of these. And now I have so much more real estate to put the rest of my textures in my scene. I might be able to get away with putting all my textures on one texture sheet. So we're going to be going with kind of a low res setup, which is good for mobile devices, which is kind of the angle I'm going at when making this level. I want to make it kind of optimized for less powerful devices. All right, so with that saved, what I'm going to do now, why is that not valid? I think it's because Google Drive is messing with it. So why don't I just call it texture sheet? Yeah. All right. So sometimes when saving files, I have no idea what's going on with that, but whatever. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a PNG of the texture. And I'm going to, for right now, I'm just going to make a PNG called text A. And this is what I'm going to be importing into Maya, and it's what I'm going to be modeling off of now. So we're done with the Photoshop. There's my text A texture. Now let's get into Maya real quick. This is going to go by fairly quick. Here we go. Here's Maya. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to, we've already snapped the tileable textures together. Now we're going to set up a 16 by 16 grid in the Maya UV editor. This is going to be pretty important. So we're going to be in modeling. We're going to go to UV, and we're going to bring up my UV editor. And you can see I have the same kind of grid layout. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to 16 here. But you'll have to set that up yourself. So follow along, because initially it does a 10 by 10 grid, but we want to keep it in a power of 2. So 16 by 16 is what we're going to go for here. So we're going to go to View, and we're going to click our little options box for our grid. And we're going to do 2 units wide, so we're in the power of 2. And we're going to take 2, and we're going to do the same thing here. We want 16 lines within 2 units. So I'm going to divide 2 by 16, and we get a grid line every 0.125 units. And we hit apply. And now we have the same 16 by 16 grid going on. So why don't we go ahead now in Maya. I'm going to minimize my UV. And I'm going to bring up my hypershade like so. And I'm going to create a new Lambert. And inside of my attribute editor, I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to go to the checkerboard, and I'm going to apply a file to it. And this is going to bring up my file interface here. Then I'm going to go to image name, click on my folder, and I'm going to navigate to where I stored my texture sheet. So now I have a material in Maya. You can see right here, it's got that weird model. It's got everything stored on it. Why don't I go ahead and rename it inside of my attribute editor here. Text A underscore mat, like so. And we can see kind of the connections going on here. Don't worry about it. This is just kind of the node-based stuff going on in the background here. So all we're really concerned with is our texture in our hypershade and its attributes in our attribute editor. So now I can start making my planes that will import into Unity here. So after we set up our 16 by 16 grid in our UV editor, I'm going to minimize that. We need to set our working units inside of Maya to be meters, because that's what we're working with in Unity. Meters, meters, meters. Remember, I was preaching about dimensions being very important here. So to do that, we'll go to Windows, Settings and Preferences. Then we'll go to Settings over here, and we'll change centimeter to meter. We'll hit Save. You'll notice that the grid grows exponentially. And now we're working in meters, so we can start really defining our meters and our dimensions correctly. So we're going to just start making planes. So I'm going to go to plane. But before I make my plane, I'm going to make sure I only have 1 by 1 divisions. I'm going to go to Create. So now we have one working unit, 1 meter, like so. And in fact, you can probably snip it. So if I hold down D on the keyboard, I can move my pivot point on my model anywhere I want. So if I hold down D and then hold down V, I can move my pivot point to any vertice on my model. And then I can release that. Now my pivot point is at the center or the corner of my model here. And then I'm going to hold down X and snap my plane to the center right here. So now when I import my plane into Unity, I'll have a nice pivot point on the edge here. It'll make snapping my planes a little bit easier. So I need to reset some transforms so I'm zeroed out in my channel box over here. So how do I do that again in this? So I think I go to Edit Mesh. The UI has changed quite a bit in 2016. So I think this is it. No, I think it's in Modify. There we go. I'm going to freeze my transformations. So now I have a nice plane, and I'm going to go to Windows and open up my outliner. And I need to give this plane a name and open up on my other screen here. So with my outliner, and I'm going to just I'll shove my outliner right here so it's not in the way too much. Why don't I look and see? So in the top left, I have my green cinder blocks. So this plane right here is going to go for my green cinder blocks. So I'm going to call this, actually, what do I call it on my asset list here? Wall cinder block green. So why don't I give it the same name? So wall cinder block green section mesh. That's a mouthful, isn't it? So here I have my plane, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my UV editor here. And what I'm seeing is I have my UVs right here. So I need to move my UVs so they match up to where my cinder block is right there. So I'm going to go to View in Photoshop. I'm going to go to Show. I'm going to bring my grid back up. That way I can count it's 4 by 4 units. And I can go ahead even inside of my Windows rendering editors hypershade. I'm going to go ahead and middle mouse click and drag and apply this material to my plane. And if I hit 6 on the keyboard or 5, hit 5 on the keyboard, I can see how my textures are being rendered out onto my plane here. So I need to fix the UVs here so they line up to only coincide with my plane here. So you'll notice something weird here. I have my texture sheet, but it's not filling the entire one-to-one space here. Well, that's because I need to go back in and tweak my grid settings so it's fitting, so it fits just this texture sheet here. I think I might have set it up wrong a second ago. So I'm going to go back to grid, and I'm going to change the units back down to 1 and hit apply. And that's great and everything, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I only have 8 units now. So what I need to do is I need to redo some math. Let's do 1 divided by 16. And if we place a grid line every, what was it, 0.0625, 0.0625, and hit apply. Now we have our texture filling the one-to-one space, and it's set up just like we have it in Photoshop here. So let's go back to Maya. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to adjust and move and scale my UVs. So I hold right click, select my UVs, and then I can just use my transform tools and scale. I'm using WER to switch between the different tools here. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to select each UV and snap them to grid. So I'm doing that by holding down X on the keyboard, and it's snapping them to my grid lines here. So I'll snap them horizontally, and I'll snap them vertically. And now we have a guaranteed UV sheet for my plane right here. So if I start duplicating this in Maya, I can start seeing now that we have tileable textures perfectly set up and perfectly nestled within my UV sheet here. And we've saved so much space on my UV by tightly packing in my textures. All right, so I can delete all these. So I can actually start making copies now. And I'm going to call this, what's next on the list here? Let's make my red concrete. What's that called? Concrete wall section. There we go, wall concrete section. And actually, I'm going to rename it here for the color so I don't get confused with my background concrete wall. All right. And I'll do this one more time, then I'll pause and finish doing it for the others. And then I'll do a quick import, export for getting our stuff into Unity so we can start seeing what's going on. So I'm going to minimize some of the stuff. And I need to call this wall red wall concrete red section mesh. And I can even go in and hide this by selecting my model, hide selection, go to display, hide selection. So now I can only see this new piece. And then I can bring up, oh, that's my hyper shade. I need to go back to UV editor. And with my new piece selected, I'll just move this over. And again, I need to snap by holding down the X button. I still need to snap my UVs. And again, I brought up my UVs by holding right click, selecting UVs. So now I have a red concrete plane. And again, we'll just duplicate. And I'm going to do that same process for all of my tileable textures now. So I'm going to pause and go ahead and make my planes. So with my last two pieces, I want to make special note that they are irregularly shaped, such as my ground right here and my stucco right there. So I'm going to make my models match those dimensions. So I have ground hex bricks right here. I'm going to hide these others so you don't get confused with those. Hide selection. Right now I haven't adjusted those, but I want to scale it in the X direction. So I'm going to do a scale of 2. I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, like so. And now I can go in and snap my UVs like so. Oh, snapped it to the wrong one. So now I have a nice ground hex brick section. I'll duplicate that. I'll hide the ground. Display, hide selection. Now I can do wall, stucco, red, section, mesh. What I'm going to do here is I need to make a half meter section. So I'm going to scale this back down to 0.5. I want you guys to see what happens in conjunction. Let's freeze those. Look what happens whenever I snap it to here. So just let me get through the snapping process. Notice how this texture is so much smaller. Well, with it being so much smaller, that means the bigger the mesh is, the more blown out the texture is going to be. So what we need to do is we need to scale this down by half, 0.5. So now we have a half meter piece. I'll go to Modify. I'll freeze those transforms. And let's compare it to something like the red brick here. Toggle, show hide. So now we have the stucco kind of being in the same proportion of detail as the brick here. Because if it was 2, look what happens if it was the same size as all the other ones. See how that stucco is just being blown out of proportion to my brick? And that's because our texture for my stucco was smaller. Okay, so we just need to make that a little bit. I need to take that back down to the 1s, back to 0. And now we'll go to Display, Show All. So now I have all the pieces of my tileable panels, and I can't just go into Unity and make simple planes here. First of all, because the planes they make in Unity just has too much geometry. So look at all those vertices. Second of all, I had to go in and adjust the UV coordinates of each and every model plane inside of Maya to get them to match up correctly. All right, so now we need to export out my 6 planes so that they make sense. And there's a few steps we need to do to export this out correctly so the dimensions in Unity come out nicely. You know what? I'm looking at this this road right here, this ground, and I'm comparing the brick size of my bricks to my cobblestone, and they're looking a little big. I think the ground bricks are way too big compared to my red bricks. What if I scaled this by half, like so? I think those bricks are more in line to the size that I should be standing on. So, yeah, I'm going to adjust the size of my ground so my cobblestone hex bricks aren't so huge. That's crazy. So I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transforms on those. There we go. I'm liking those dimensions a little bit better. It's all about keeping your dimensions in check with other things in your scene. I noticed that those ground bricks were just way too big compared to the bricks of my wall here. All right, so now I'm going to start the exportation process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the model name here. I'm going to hit Control C, and I'm going to store the name of this model to my clipboard. So with it selected, I'm going to go to Edit, or actually File, Export Selection, and I'm going to select FBX Export. And there's a few things, there's one little thing we got to adjust here. We got to go to File Type Specific Options, and we have to go to Advanced Options. We got to go to Units, and we have to uncheck it from automatic, and we have to set the units to centimeters, because Maya's default working unit is centimeters, and we're working in meters now. We have to do this check so when we export our model, it's going to be in the right dimensions or in the right units for Unity to handle. I don't know why, but different programs just have different kinds of units they work in, and this has been the proven way to make sure that what you're exporting from Maya will end up in the same size in Unity. So make sure you change your units and your FBX options to centimeters like so. Then we go to File Name, hit Control V to paste that name in. I'm going to go to my Trojan project. I'm going to go to Asset Models. This is going to be the actual model I'm going to put into my scene here. And I'm going to export selection. All right. I'm just going to do that for this one asset, and then I'm going to pause and do it for the rest of them because I don't want to bore you by doing each and every single one. So here I have my FBX wall cinder block green section mesh. So I'm going to bring up Unity. I want to go to my meshes folder. I want to bring up my asset models folder. I'm simply going to drag from this folder into my meshes here. And you'll notice that it brings with it a texture. You're going to want to delete those materials folder because you only want to get at the model itself. All right. So I'm just going to bring in this wall texture inside of Unity here. And I'm going to make a quick material for it. And I already have one there. I'll just start from scratch. I'll right click inside my materials folder, go to create material, and call this text A map. And then what I need to do now is I need to import my go to asset models. I need to import my texture map text A into Unity. There we go. And then with my material selected, there's map A. For my albedo map, I'll click this little empty square here, or that little timepiece circle, and I can apply it to text A. So now I have my texture inside of a material, and I can apply it to my brick here, and there we go. I'll change that to pivot, so I can either go to center or pivot, and now I have a nice pivot point. And now I can start building my green cinder block building inside of Unity here. All right, so that's how we're going to be getting our models inside of Unity. And you know what? I could probably size this up to 2 by 2 to 2 because I'm trying to compare the size of my cinder blocks to my actual person here. And those cinder blocks looked a little small when it was scaled down to 1 to 1 to 1. Or actually, maybe they were just right. Actually, I think they're just right. And those are just some considerations you'll be making. So with your cinder block section, you can start coming in and duplicating and making your buildings. But I've already kind of inflated this lesson here, so I'm going to stop here. That's just a quick way where we can get our tileable textures made and imported into Unity after we make our planes in Maya. And it's going to be a really nice method for creating some of the more wider areas of textures. That didn't make sense. Let me bring up the picture again just to show you guys what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm going to go to my reference. And it was just a quick way to get some of the wider area walls of my level made using tileable textures like so. All right, so I'm going to cut this video off. It's already kind of ran long. Next, we're going to start tackling how we can go in and make some of these other models and some other modeling and texturing techniques. All right, thanks, guys.